Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Joining me today is a ghost for fun.
Satan is Lord.
And joining us as a special guest is that Matt Killer.
Don't turn around. I'm just kidding. But seriously, don't.
Oh, nice. Matt, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always good to have a friend over for dinner. Anyway. Yeah, that's stupid, sorry. So here we are to finally wrap up Geeky Gentleman, Ghouly Gentleman Horror Month with our Halloween special. And so I was kind of racking my brain about what to talk about, since horror topics are a bit harder to come by, which is why we mostly do reviews throughout Horror Month. And I kind of landed on this. I don't know how much mileage I'll get. We may go off topic at several points here. Hell, Matt's here. This will turn into a Sonic video.
Was I not supposed to bring my notes on Sonic.exe? Because, I've got them.
I got
good.
the PDF.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Now, if you go to the table of contents here. So instead, I decided we'd talk about, the visual iconography, the visual style, the visual makeup of horror. Because I feel like it's got a very unique language, and interestingly, it plays on a lot of similar themes. There's kind of if you'll forgive my $10 words, there's a bit of an epistemology to it, of what makes the thing scary, and they all kind of go back to a certain root. So, yeah. To try to get us all in the right headspace, the example I kept using is a lot of things have fangs and just sharp, pointy teeth. And, that's really interesting to me, because there's something very primal about that, right? And I don't know, that just kind of got me thinking on the whole rabbit hole of horror here.
And I think it's on that specifically. I think you can even go farther with, okay, so you've got, the general kind of, where does the spiky teeth thing come from? Well, that's obviously a primal innate fear of monkey, we have fleshy bodies, spiked teeth mean eat. It comes from that instinct. But horror found a very interesting way of more than just doing that. They also like to scare someone. Sometimes something isn't even needs to be visually identifiable as scary in of itself, typically. Sometimes something just being wrong. An example, legs where the arm should be, or multiple heads, but in different intersecting patterns. That kind of, your brain is just nope, this isn't a thing that should happen, and it causes your body, it causes a reaction to freak out. And visually, when you're doing horror, specifically in films or comics, when you have the strength of that medium, or how even nowadays video game horror is so big, being able to use that language is really interesting, because I do think you can tell when someone knows what they're doing with that, rather than someone who's just doing it because it's the trope.
Oh, that's definitely true. And I'm going to try not to make this just a full-on game thing, but survival horror was a very popular genre that then died because publishers decided it was dead, and then it got brought back by a bunch of indie people, and now it's like bigger than ever. And it's like video games as an art form, if you consider them an art form, are newer than movies, and so I think they are still playing around with genre tropes and conventions for horror in a way that maybe some films have gotten kind of stale. I think in video gaming there's like kind of that interactive dimension, I think, has brought out a lot of people's creativity and kind of like new ways to scare, because you're absolutely right where it's like, something primal is scary, but something unsettling that's not even really threatening to you. Like there's like a picture that floats around of like a teddy bear that has like a set of human teeth, and it's like, that's not threatening to you, but it's terrifying because it's just not correct.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting place where horror comes in. It's that violation of the thing, right? So like the teddy bear is this very like comfy, cuddly image, and then just something to make it wrong kind of just violates that sense of safety.
That's why Sonic.exe works. Oh, I got it in there. Okay.
Yeah, there you go. Now, if you turn to page 72, warning, this part can get a bit dry. The next slide. No, but like that sense of just kind of ruining something. I mean, I think that's all over visual horror. Like, how many times in a horror movie or something does someone like run to either an authority figure or a parental figure, like a figure of safety, and then it turns out it's the monster?
Well, I mean, let's go to the classic example, right? The original Friday the 13th movie, which is probably my favorite of all the like classic slasher movies. I think part of the brilliance of what, to me, makes that movie stand head and shoulders above the original Halloween and the original Nightmare, at least for me, was the use of Jason's, mother as the killer, because she's this kindly old lady who then, you get to see the actress kind of go from like, oh, honey, are you okay, to like, they killed my boy, and then like it's so creepy, and I think it's why that movie works so well for me.
Yeah, so I don't know, the visual dynamic there of corrupting the image of safety is something that I find really fascinating. And then there's just like really, again, the primal horror tends to get me a lot too. Like, big fucking eyes is really, really just down to your DNA, right? Like, yeah. That's just something that always kind of bothers everybody. And I don't know, I really like it when you see monsters or whatever in movies, and they just will have massive eyes, and it's terrifying.
You know what specific monster trope creeps me out?
What's that?
Monsters that have jaws that drop down farther than they like physically should be able to. That creeps. That, like, it's not like snakes. It's like they're built to do that. So like whatever. But like, I think it was like some really crappy movie. I want to say it was like Legion or some crap, and there was like this like angel or demon or whatever it was. But he was just a dude, and then suddenly he like lets out this scream, and his jaw like drops like way lower than like a human jaw should be able to. That freaks me out, and I don't know why.
It's just that this is not meant to happen. This is wrong. Even so much because you get the idea of, okay, so the human body is normally just intrinsically freaked out by like death. You're meant to avoid anything dead, but seeing a corpse, especially like in a movie, when it's that degree of separation, isn't normally necessarily just visually horrifying. You can have people die in like regular ass dramatic movies, and it can be sad, and you can think of it as like a beautiful passing. There's not inherently a horror to a corpse. But you rip the head off that corpse, and either you show just the head or just the headless body, and now it's horror, because it's that unnatural tampering with the state of being. It's this wasn't just someone died, this was mutilation. This is like a horrific act. And then going even further with that, you want to look at some things where it's more psychological horror, something that can freak people out. And I think it's a very good tactic for, I'm not really an advocate for the jump scare, but I think this sometimes works, is when you have a very like psychopathic character who you want to show is literally cannot control their actions and make that scary. Whenever they do something like the sudden jolt or the sudden bang in the head repeatedly against the glass constantly, where it's like there's no fear of pain, that is very unsettling, because you just kind of get that when you're watching something and you put someone else's shoes, you imagine yourself, okay, that's gonna hurt, like someone peels off like a toenail or something, oh, that's hurt. You see someone do that nonchalantly, it's scary, because it tells you a lot about what that person or creature has to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. It's such a broad topic that I'm having a really hard time not just going, now this is scary and this is scary.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is and I don't know if this has a ton of legs. I don't, but I think that's one thing that's interesting is the potential unintended sort of consequences of what we show as scary and what we find scary. So like what I mean by that is like asylums, like haunted insane asylums or whatever. That's like a big thing in horror, like insane asylums. And like people who, you have like even in the first Halloween, the whole thing is that like Michael is mentally ill and he goes to an insane asylum and then he breaks out and he's like pure evil. But all we're really told about him is that he's just like mentally not there. And so it's like, it's this interesting thing of we find abnormal things scary, and that includes people who are not in the same like mindset as us, and that can cause broader societal ramifications where you sort of have this potential to, through horror, otherize actual people in your society because they potentially have characteristics that you might associate with a much more exaggerated version of that in like a horror movie. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
What you're saying is society is the real monster.
I am, and I can't wait to see Joker and have it tell me how right I am about that.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that is something that's very interesting, and it's definitely been played with. I feel it's fair to say much more recently than it was in the past, but like it's definitely there. But like you think of things like Shape of Water, and like that's Del Toro. He's definitely sexually attracted to H.P. Lovecraft monsters, and you can't convince me otherwise. But like he frames like this horrific looking monster as the sympathetic one, and he frames Michael Shannon as the evil monstrous one.
He's cartoonishly evil in the movie.
I haven't even seen the movie. I know enough about it at this point.
Michael Shannon is cartoonishly evil, but go ahead.
Is Michael Shannon not cartoonishly something in every movie he's been in?
I adore Michael Shannon, but yes, that's very true.
Does anyone else remember Michael Shannon in Pearl Harbor?
He's in Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, and like I shit you not, he's in Pearl Harbor and he has bleached hair, even though that movie takes place in the fucking 1940s.
Oh no.
It's weird. He just did not give a fuck. And then there's the movie where he plays Elvis, and that was something else. I'm sorry, we're getting off topic. But no, like the way that you frame the monster, the horrifying thing, can also matter, because the creature from the Black Lagoon look that the creature has in Shape of Water, everything about that's ticking those boxes I was talking about. Big eyes, fangs, it's otherworldly, it just looks wrong, it's a man, but it's a fish. It's checking all these boxes for a primal fear.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, it's all in just how you frame it about what's actually scary. And that's interesting.
And you can use those rules outside of horror, right? Because, like, I'm gonna make this about the other thing I know a lot about. So, like, in Force Awakens, for example, when Kylo Ren first meets Rey, and he stalks her through the forest on Takodana, and they shoot it like she's running away from a slasher villain. Like, she's in the forest, she hears, like, branches snapping, she hears, like, all this stuff, and then he enters frame, he's you know, kind of up in the frame, he's really huge, he's already got his weapon ignited, so we're kind of filming this character in absolutely not a horror film, but we're filming him the same way that we might film Jason Voorhees. And that we're kind of playing with those horror rules, not really to make this a horror scene, but to establish the type of relationship between these two characters in this moment. And so that's kind of fun, how you can kind of use the rules of horror outside of its own niche.
Yeah.
My favorite example of that, the imagery of fear being used to elicit a different reaction from the audience than fear itself, is my favorite is just in general really good scary Batman.
Yeah.
When you're watching Batman be scary and it's done effective, or you're reading Batman be scary, it's so well done. And you never feel horrified of him, but you feel horrified for it's like the ultimate slasher movie, right? Because you know he's not going to kill anyone. So you can have that joy of, oh, I don't even have to worry about people getting murdered, or I have to feel that on my conscience. He's just beating up these horrible, horrible murderers. So you get to have that thrill, but he's also like a superhero, and that's one of the things of Batman visually imagery, which I think is underappreciated and underutilized in a lot of medium. And it's something where, again, once you nail the idea of what makes something scary, you can take that away, like you mentioned, Matt, and use it in different places. And I guess I'll ask, do you feel like, because we've, over the course of human history, like not even just cinema, just literature and humans telling story, do you think we've kind of reached the idea of, like, I guess like the metaphor, the perfect cup? Have we finally figured out every idea that is scary? Is there a new visual for scary that we haven't got to yet? An example being, okay, so horror movie monsters normally go in two directions. Either they're wet and slimy, or they're hard and scaly, or that's just general. But like, say Jason Voorhees, he's be full on like the tough scale, whereas like a Cthulhu X monster would be like the fish scale and stuff. And everything kind of falls in between that. And then there's like offshoots. But overall, we have kind of like fully mapped out what this language of horror is. Or do you disagree?
Well, can I jump in on that real quick, because I do actually have something to say about that. I think what it comes down to is, I don't think you'll ever find an end to that well, because I think what society finds terrifying is different from generation to generation. Like the monsters and the slashers, you know, you go back to like, you know, way back when, you know, these black and white like alien invasion and monster movies, you know, those were all having to do with, you know, kind of xenophobia, racism, and they were all kind of allegorical monsters for those things. And then you go to the 80s and you have like the slashers and stuff like that. So I think you come to today, and I think like today's youth, I think we generally have slightly more, what's the word I'm looking for? Existential fears. You know,
Black Mirror.
We have fears of ideas, fears of depression, of loneliness, of being alone. So when I look at something like It Follows, for example, that's a movie that actually kind of freaks me out. And that monster is just, it's just an idea. It's just a thing that follows you. It doesn't look like anything. It follows you, and it can look like whatever it wants to look like. So like, that's a terrifying idea, but it's not drawing on any sort of primal visual fear. It's not aping any like previous visual monster design, but it's just this like large, because I think, like I said, I think we are kind of more in our modern day afraid of like ideas and like existential fears, and so I think you just need to use horror in a way that evokes those fears.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, like, Black Mirror is kind of all about that, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't suck. That they started doing happy endings and it just ruined it. Like, that's what that whole series is about, though. You had, like, BRB is this very just existential fear of, what if I'm gonna die alone? And there's like what if technology bad is kind of the premise of every episode of Black Mirror.
Getting tired of that.
Yeah, again, once they started doing happy episodes, or happy endings, it just started to suck. But like that's all kind of the premise behind those is it's not monsters, and there's still like visually terrifying imagery in those those good episodes, but it's more just like very, heady kind of stuff. It's very thoughtful kind of horror. God, I don't think you could do like a big dumb monster on screen and have it be legitimately scary. I'm trying to really think if there's anything kind of like that in recent years that's kind of to that mold, because one of the best horror films of the last decade was The Babadook, and it's a big scary looking monster, but it's a very like heady fear kind of topic. Pennywise the Clown has a monster design, sure, but like what's making him actively scary is this very heady fear itself kind of topic, and there's of course like the coming of age stuff wrapped up in that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really trying to rack my brain, just like big scary monster in the same way that like Frankenstein or the Mummy were. Is there anything like that the last couple of years that's like really stood out?
Yeah, nothing good, I don't think.
Yeah, it's something where that well is kind of dried up because of how society has changed, because it applies to this topic as well, but the visual idea of fear and the language of fear and like the sharp fangs and the scary monsters got trademarked. You can't really fear Frankenstein and vampires in the same way you would when they were just books. Now that kids are being able to buy their costumes for really cheap, and you get them on school lunchboxes, and they're in children's cartoons. That doesn't just apply to that, but like you go to Godzilla, who's probably the biggest example of a horror monster initially devised as like a really horrifying depiction of, well, like the aftermaths of the nuke. You just turned into a superhero basically, and they've tried to go back to those roots, but it's never quite been the same, because once you've took that step to the left, you can't ever go back. And I think that applies to just monsters in general now, because people are so desensitized to it.
Once they go camp, it's really hard to recapture that fear that they initially inspire.
Mm-hmm. Just the idea of the physical force doesn't really work against millennials anymore, because a lot of them are just like, yeah, cool, kill me, bro.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is like, did you ever play PT when that was out before Konami took it down? Okay.
No.
So like, PT is like a horror masterpiece, and there is a monster. I mean, it's a ghost, but I mean, it still has like a physical form. But like, it's a woman who is like kind of dirtied up, and she kind of floats in the air like a ghost, and her head is like constantly making these like jittery movements. And when she appears, there's a sequence where you see her at the end of the hallway, and then she like can come at you, and it's in this like really unnaturally moving way, and like that did scare me for sure. But I don't know how much of it was purely her physical design, and how much of it was the atmosphere that led up to that moment, her physical design plus the way she moved. So I feel like in a sense it's almost like we're having to kind of, in order to make something scary, like in order to make just a visual design of something scary, we kind of have to set a mood. And lately I've seen it's more about taking something familiar and distorting it to the point where it's not quite as familiar. It kind of reminded me of, I think, didn't Guillermo del Toro do something called like Mama? And I think there was like kind of a woman ghost in that who was kind of like, you know, she was a woman, but she was like, you know, emaciated and tall and like had these like jittery movements. So it's like that's pretty creepy, but it's not really a monster. It's just taking something familiar and distorting it until it feels off. So it's kind of a combination of monstrous features with that sort of distortion of the normal that we were talking about.
Yeah, you know, I was just going through things and I was trying to find an example. I guess you'd maybe say Krampus, but
Love
I don't know.
Krampus.
Yeah, but I don't know if like you're scared of Krampus.
No.
But as you were saying that, the only thing that really came to mind for me was Slenderman.
Oh yeah.
For like the meme age monster, I guess.
Slenderman, Jeff the Killer, like all of the different like creepypasta monsters and like SCPs, which are, yeah, I mean that's kind of a whole new breed of like Slenderman is almost like the new like serial killer, you know, the new Jason Voorhees for like
Well, if you wanna
the
go
internet
that
age.
comparison, I think it'd be like Slenderman's the new Freddy,
Yeah.
Jeff the Killer's the new Jason, and
Sure.
then SCP's the new Cthulhu mythos.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, sure. That's yeah, exactly. I think that's yeah.
Eloquent as always, Matt.
Uh,
Sorry, couldn't help myself. Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely interesting to try to think of what are the like, what is the evolution of horror becoming, and yeah, but at the same time, is anyone actually scared of Slenderman that's over the age of 13?
well, I mean, it comes down to like, I'm not afraid of Slenderman, but when you play that game and like, you know, you hear the movements and the heartbeat, and then you turn around and you see him out of the corner of your eye, it's like he could be anything, and you would find that scary, you know?
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. It's just I feel like I feel like that's a very important point. He could be anything, and you'd find that scary. Slenderman is that like that surprise fear, as opposed to the like nightmare sticks with you kind of thing. You know?
He's got that mythos around him, sort of like, you know, like how SCPs are the new, you know, Cthulhu, you know, H.P. Lovecraft type thing. It's like you're kind of just fascinated by it more than you're afraid of it. Because I think part of what's made Slenderman take off is that he's not like horrifying to look at in and of himself, but he is kind of unsettling, and he does have kind of like an interesting lore and story to him. So I think the Shape of Water and stuff like that, and people's fascination with Slenderman and SCP shows that like people who are our age or younger seem to be more enthralled by traditionally horrific imagery more than they are terrified by it.
I guess that makes sense because, you know, my generation, I grew up with like the existence of like that one kid in class who had a Freddy Krueger toy.
Sure.
You know? Like not everyone had him because not everyone had bad parents, but like there'd be like that one kid who had the Jason or Michael Myers toy because it was you know, we're in the 90s, we're coming off the backs of the 80s where like movies were made for adults but marketed to children.
Yeah.
And so I guess it's just growing up with that kind of fascination normalized horror iconography in an interesting way. And so it let us like kind of look past the moment that you would usually see people look away. Like I don't think I've ever. I guess that's not true because my wife does it all the time, where she'll like turn away from the screen. But I don't think I've ever had to turn away from the screen while watching a horror movie. Because the moment that you used to look away, I feel more and more of us been able to look at, and so we're looking past and we're looking at the deeper things that are making the movie scary beyond just the oh gross or ew that surprised me.
I still look away, but only if it's like a close-up of someone getting their arm broken or something like that. Like I just oof. But it's not a fear thing. I just get like sympathy pains. But yeah, I mean,
so Saw is your favorite franchise
oh
then?
my God. Well, the first Saw is so like weirdly because the first Saw had like a crappy budget, so like they really cut away from most of the really bad stuff in the first Saw movie. Like the first Saw movie is not quite so bad, but like I'm not the biggest fan of gore really in general, and I think that's something to dive into as well. I mean, there are whole fan groups who just are like love gore and they want to see the goriest movies ever. They're just fascinated by it, and there are people who are fascinated by monsters. And I mean, there's like a don't ask me why I know this, but there's like a whole subgenre of like horror themed like erotica out there, like on like Amazon and on, you know, fan fiction sites and stuff like that. I mean, it's like we just have a very different relationship with these creatures and monsters now.
Hey Matt, why do you know about that?
You know,
Link, source, put in the description below. So we're actually gonna have Jason Voorhees lingerie in the comments below. 10% discount code. Type in Geeky Gentleman at the checkout.
well, I mean, if you assume that, I think I'm paraphrasing Lindsay Ellis, but if you look at it with the assumption that these original monsters are sort of allegorical stand-ins for, you know, race, xenophobia, stuff like that, the fact that we are now so, I don't know, woke, for lack of a better term, we're now kind of looking at those allegories in a new light, and so now we have the monster, but it's sympathetic with Guillermo del Toro's Shape of Water, and obviously he's not the first person to do that, but I mean, that's exactly what it is. We're now looking at these monsters, and, you know, we're kind of thinking about their plight, which we were already kind of doing as far back as the original Frankenstein book.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, Frankenstein, there's very few things where the monster is just a monster. It's usually deeper than that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, it's weird. It's just weird, the way that we've adopted the horror icons, and yeah, there's a lot of sympathy for them now, and it's just interesting because then what has just undeniably happened is we've now turned the mirror of horror onto ourselves. Mm-hmm. And so now the stuff that used to be creepy and unsettling has been subverted so many times that it's not creepy and unsettling for its original purpose anymore, and now you're kind of it's getting to the point where we're almost sympathizing more with the creepy, unsettling stuff than we would with the naturally innocent and like more neutral image stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like Get Out, and like what's creepy about that movie and what's unsettling about that movie is that it's just like people who did this. Like, it's just normal people who were capable of like doing all this. It's like, it's stuff like that that's kind of more terrifying on like an existential level.
Probably why The Purge got so big as well.
That's a really good point.
It's one of those things. No, you go ahead.
Even being like a thoughty movie, you can still have shit.
Exactly. It's one of those things where just because we have changed tastes doesn't necessarily mean the content's going to get better. It just means we're also going to get schlock focused on these more existential societal ideas. And I think that's interesting because we kind of made a joke of it, but I do think it's a very important point to touch on because of how ingrained it is to horror. The idea of sexualizing the monsters and the relationship between scary imagery and sensual imagery is always kind of been there. Just have to look at vampires throughout every single bit of their history. You'd be hard to find a sexless vampire. Even Nosferatu wanted to get it on. Like, there's always this idea of, again, I think maybe there's interesting conversation. And you know me, I always want to bring the dicks in, but how phallic horror is and how that's the scary thing. something sharp, something stabbing.
I mean, Aliens, the entire Alien franchise is just based around, guys, wouldn't it be fucking scary to get raped?
Exactly.
Yeah, the phallic imagery within horror is something that's definitely there to talk about. It's intriguing when it kind of gets reversed, and they kind of play around with it the other way. I had an example and I lost it. Vagina Monster. There's something else. Oh, Teeth. Fucking love Teeth. Teeth is a movie from 2007, and I will highly contend, we did a review of it last year, you can go check it out there. I will highly contend that movie came out about 10 years too early. Because if it did come out in 2016, 2017, it would have been the Me Too horror movie.
Oh, wow.
It's 100%, like, there's some moments where it's a little like, but it is 100% a movie just about rape culture, and it's really, really fascinating how weird that all came together as. It's a very it is a very like early movie, but it's a movie about a teenage girl who has teeth in her vagina, and she uses that how you only could, right? So it's just there's really something to that. And it gets, I don't know, it's interesting when you invert sexuality in horror, especially in American culture, because we're so reserved and repressed about stuff like that, and I imagine that's probably, multiplied 7,000 times over in the UK. All your stiff upper lips.
That's a horror movie I want to see, and the stiff upper lip gets used as a weapon.
Yeah, we're so repressed about sexuality in the Western Hemisphere, I guess I'd just call it, that they pair so well together. Sex and horror just always seem to go hand in hand for some reason.
Yeah, well, the really old black and white monster movies, it was always, the monsters after our women. Some King Kong has taken, and not like King Kong's like the scariest thing ever, but the swamp creature has taken the fair maiden, the lady, and we got to go save her. So it's always kind of been there, and there's always been this like loose association with sexual assault or just sex in general, regardless of if it's in a good light or a bad light. Yeah, there's a reason a bunch of people like didn't like something came out where a bunch of people were like looking at the Babadook as like some kind of gay icon, or was that just...
yeah, the Babadook and Pennywise are the gay horror icon. No, they're in a relationship.
On Twitter, I stumbled upon an artist who drew like legit like Bishonen anime ass looking like NSFW smut with Pennywise, and I'm just like, yeah, there's absolutely a market for this, and that's so strange to me.
Are you part of the market? Are you just trying to hide it from the world?
No, but there is a... so here's kind of a funny thing. There's a video game. It's like one of the best video games of the past couple generations called Bloodborne. And it's an action RPG with like very heavy horror elements, and it takes place in like Victorian times. It's like Gothic Victorian, but in addition to like werewolves and stuff, it's also very, very heavy with like H.P. Lovecraft, cosmic horror. So it's got werewolves, and it's also got tentacle monsters. There is my wife is pretty into fan fiction, and so she like looked up some, because she likes this game too, she looked up some fan fiction. She's like, there is a ton of fan fiction for this game that is just like one-shot smut fix of someone getting like assaulted or having sex with these like boss monsters, because like the bosses are usually big monstrous creatures, and there's like smutty fanfics about it, and I'm just like, there is something about these like creatures that just elicits this, and I don't fully know what it is either. It's interesting.
I might have to re-break out my copy of My Girlfriend is a T-Rex.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was I heard about it from a Dorkly video. They're talking about all these weird things that, like, female sexualized non-things, like fucking doorknobs and stuff. They made the doorknob a girl, which is weird. But there's this, they talk about this one thing, it's called My Girlfriend is a T-Rex, in which dinosaurs didn't go extinct, they just evolved to be cute girls on top and still dinosaur bottoms.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really fucking weird, and I read it, and it's probably my most clickbaity thumbnail for an episode of Trade Talk. I did the whole, like, holding it up to my face with, like, a whoa look on my face and everything. You know, yeah, there is something really weird to, like, oh, here's this really weird thing, but we're gonna make it have sex, and it's like, but why though? Yeah, I don't necessarily get it. I kind of wonder if it's all just because of like hentai tentacle stuff, because that was made to, like, get around censorship, but then I think it created a fetish, and then I think that's just, like, slowly seeped out and expanded enough, maybe? Question mark?
I'm sure if you went back far enough, you would have found women who wanted to fuck Frankenstein.
Well, I mean, is it not, like, kind of a natural evolution of people who are into, like BDSM and, like, those sort of, like, domination and submission, like, relationships, is, like, a monster that you physically have no way to fight back against? Isn't that just sort of an extension of that sort of fantasy?
I mean, certainly you could definitely see it that way. I don't know. It's just it's really weird, because I'm trying to kind of go back in my head and think of, like, how far back does this go based on what Alfie just said. It's like, were there, like, women that wanted to swoon over Frankenstein? Like, I'm sure there probably were. Part of the whole point of Dracula is he just turns Mina Harker into his own personal whore. I'm kind of going back in my head and, like, you know, Zeus fucked a lot of women as, like, a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And if you want to play, like, okay, are the myths based in any kind of fact? I mean, maybe some crazy ancient Greek princess just got, like, really frisky with, like, a goose one day? I don't know. That shit...
And somehow that sequence of events led to us getting Untitled Goose Game thousands of years later.
Yeah, did you see the Entitled Zeus game?
That's amazing.
That meme was so funny. No, but, like, there's Zeus, like, is a shower of gold and a bull and all this stuff. I'm like, I mean, bestiality definitely existed in the past and to this day. And so I guess maybe it's just, like, a connection to that. Maybe we've just become... I mean, I'm going to say properly prudish, but I guess I'm still stuck inside my societal bubble. Maybe I'll look back on this video 10 years later and be like, oh, God, I can't believe I looked down on bestiality back then. But, like, it's just... I don't know. I think that's, like, a taboo for a very certain reason. But, I mean, it certainly was practiced in the past, and could it just be an extension of that kind of those kinds of urges re-rearing their head? Maybe.
Well, you get to have your cake and eat it too. It's that, I guess, if you want to call it that, like, primal interesting thing that people had when it came to, like, ancient, you know, bestiality or whatever. But the caveat of now it's like this fully sentient monster creature, so those pesky morals don't necessarily rear their ugly head, because when it's like a dog, it's just like, that's a dog. But when it's a werewolf, it's like, no, that's a werewolf. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really weird and interesting discussion, and it does tie into that visual thing, because we've become more sympathetic to those things, whereas before they used to, like, my mom wouldn't be able to watch like a let's play of a boss fight for one of the bosses in Bloodborne. She'd walk away from it, like, nope, just can't do it. Can't look at that. Won't be able to sleep tonight. And I I don't think that's as much a thing in this generation. Like, my wife will still go like, nope, when she sees certain imagery and stuff. But it's usually more like unsettling things as opposed to like monstrous things. I feel like maybe we've just kind of transcended and gotten more into just being able to see those things as sympathetic, and so it's kind of spiraled, and it's like all these weird little things stacking up onto each other. I don't know, it's very strange.
Yep. I mean,
I definitely agree.
Yeah.
It's one of those. I guess if you want to go even further with it, so like the idea of the visually scary thing, right? We've been talking about just like creatures and monsters, but horror is also making that for locations and like houses or hospitals, or like you mentioned earlier, Matt, like insane asylums. I also think that's also happened because this generation is very into that aesthetic.
Oh, for sure.
The idea of living in one of those places is a lot of people's like dream house.
Yep. I follow some artists on Twitter, and they're into the spooky shit. And I saw one of the female artists I followed. She's like, "Oh man, do you think my neighbors will be mad if I paint my house black?" And I'm like, "Yes, they probably will," because that would be like a bit of a standout, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and like my own life is a testament to that. Like my wife is, and myself, you know, we do like that like kind of creepy, I guess, gothic aesthetic. I mean, our living room we painted black. So I mean, there is definitely like a lot of people find comfort and kind of aesthetic value in the macabre, which I blame the Addams Family for.
I mean, to be fair, Tish and Gomez have the most healthy on-screen relationship I think I've ever seen.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was so cool because you saw this like family of like weird looking misfits who lived in a, you know, for all intents and purposes, what was basically like a haunted mansion. This should be like terrifying. It's a bunch of odd looking people living in a big creepy mansion, but it's filled with so much like love and like joy, and you're just kind of like and I think that you know, the combining that juxtaposition is kind of what made that click for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I remember watching the Addams Family show, or the new Addams Family, I think it was called, show on like ABC Family. After the movie got popular, like God, the Addams Family really took off, and I mean, I certainly saw the Addams Family stuff before I ever even knew what the Munsters were, but there is a difference there. The Addams Family are like quirky and weird on top of living quirky and weird, whereas the Munsters were like perfectly normal platonic family. They were just monsters. Yeah, I don't know, it's when Munsters hentai.
I'm sure you don't have to ask when, but where. It exists. I'm 100% on that.
Probably. You know, they tried to reboot the Munsters, and like it was a really bad idea, except they cast Eddie Izzard as Grandpa Munster, which is like really good casting.
The more you know.
I know, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a comic. I think it's by Tim Seeley. I'm gonna look stupid if it's not by Tim Seeley, but there's a comic called Hack Slash that's like, it's very much about horror. Like, it's about this girl who fights serial killers and stuff like that. But at the same time, it's an extraordinarily like sex-filled book. It does not like it's gore, horror, and sex. Like, that is what that book is. And so it's just, there's this just weird, I don't know. It's great. I mean, I love it. I think it's pretty cool and interesting, but it's just odd how these things have become so intertwined for a lot of people. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a fan personally of like combining the horrible and the macabre with like the sensual and the lustful. Like I think it's interesting. I like it. I generally like if someone's like, oh, my pitch is that's like a sexy horror thing. I'm just kind of like, yeah. I mean, I'm curious to try that out. Then, like, it's just, I'm curious to see what it's about.
Using curious as the word there is very fitting.
Yeah. But no, it's just like, no, okay. So I'm just like, all right, what's Hack Slash about? And he's just like, well, it's about this like punk goth chick who beats the hell out of serial killers. I'm just like,
and wears like a micro skirt and like a fishnet top and a black bra. Yeah, I'm just looking at him like, yep.
Yeah, and I'm just like, sign me the fuck up right now. Like, that sounds awesome. And it is. It's pretty cool. So it's like, you know.
Okay. I mean, you don't have to justify your kinks to me, Matt.
Well, I'm going to because I need the internet to know about them.
You need the validation.
I do. I need the validation. Badly.
That's totally fair. Yeah, taking that aesthetic of like the sexual and merging it with horror. I mean, it's like it's kind of always been there. Like, particularly when horror movies just kind of had to be R-rated, they started throwing more sex in just to, I guess, try to make themselves more interesting. Because some of them got really bad. But yeah, I mean, like, how many 20-year-olds who are pretending to be teenagers have we seen fuck and then die in horror movies, right?
That's so true. There's a lot of nudity in, like, 80s horror movies.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And, like, I mean, I love Tales from the Crypt, but, like, that whole first season, it's like, okay, how many tits can we fit in this episode? It's like, well, it's set in a prison. Okay, but can we, like, go to a go-go dancer strip club for a little while in that prison episode? I guess. Like, it's just, they really work it in there.
What's that movie where the, like, family is, like, on an RV trip and, like, they get, like, taken hostage by these bank robbers who then drive them to, like, a strip club that turns out to be populated entirely by vampires?
Oh, From Dusk Till Dawn.
Yes! My God. Like,
Robert Rodriguez, man.
Yeah, like, that movie... I feel bad for not remembering the name of that movie, but that movie, I watched it and I was just like, yeah, like that, exactly. Like, this is such a, like, we take this scenario, we figure out some way to add sex into it, and then once we've done that, we then turn everything gory and violent. And I'm just like, yep, that's pretty much a microcosm of it.
Because it is all just like, again, like your base down levels, it's all bodies. Gore and sex are closer than you'd probably be comfortable admitting to, but it is just the human body in different expressions or positions or being chopped up and put in different places. And like, so it's exploring that, right? It's exploring the form and the manipulation of the form. And I think that's interesting with horror because I guess an interesting way to go down with that is, okay, so do you feel like, a question to both of you, when you have horror that is physically threatening, you're in a room with something that is physically overpowering you and it's going to kill you, does that freak you out more? Or is it something where you're in a room and you can't see anything, but you know something's watching you, like that psychological horror? Does that freak you out more? Because they're both, one is like almost a lack of visual, but the lack of there being a visual is what makes the horror, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they both have their merits, and I think I'm afraid of both at different times, you know? My God, this was like probably a month or two back, but I was having, not a bad dream, I was having the start of a bad dream, like, you know, that like, oh, someone's gonna come up and scare me kind of bad dream, and it was gonna wake me up. But I became lucid in the dream before that happened, and so I woke myself up to save me from that fright, right? Mm-hmm. And that was actually the worst decision I could have made, because then I still had all the anxiety of it's about to happen. And then I'm fully awake in just a pitch black ass room. And then the completely logical part of my head, I'm like, I'm in my fucking house. It's 3 a.m. I'm in a room with a closed door. Nothing's in here. Everything's fine. Didn't help me get back to sleep. So I get up and I'm like, all right, I'm thirsty anyway. Let's go downstairs, get a drink of water, and then I'll feel fine. And just walking across the room blind to open the door, feeling out for something to get my bearings, became more intense and added to the anxiety every time my hand groped at nothing. Getting out of the room and walking down the stairs, just every corner I turned, it's going to be there, it's going to be there, it's going to be there. To the point where once I got my drink of water, I was 100% wired, like, fight or flight mode awake.
Oh, yeah.
And I couldn't go back to sleep at that point. So I had to, like, turn on a light and sit down and watch YouTube videos for, like, half an hour at 3 in the goddamn morning before I could go back to sleep. So, like, that's a very, there's something there. There's that fear of the unknown. But at the same time, I think everyone's had the experience of there's something, like, in front of you that's scary. You're walking around your neighborhood and suddenly a dog walks around the corner without a leash. That's fucking terrifying. The bigger the dog, the scarier that becomes.
I mean, yeah, for sure. When it comes to fiction, it's, for me, always going to be the, like, unknown thing. Like, I can watch any movie with, like, a serial killer or, like, Jason or whatever and sleep like a baby that night. But if I watch a movie where, they tell you something's in the house, but you don't know what, like, that's, like, Paranormal Activity is kind of a boring movie, but it stayed with me longer than, like, slasher movies that had more jump scares. Because for me, I've always been way more afraid of, the unknown and ghosts and, hauntings, I guess, than I've ever been of, like, monsters and slashers. Because if a slasher shows up, then whatever, I guess I'll die. But if there's, like, a ghost in my house or a demon in my house or some shit like that, then it's just, like, I don't know what could happen. Like, is it going to make me see my worst fears? Is it always going to be watching me from behind? Like, I don't know. Like, it's just, But, like, yeah, if a slasher breaks in or a werewolf breaks in, well, all right, I guess I know what's about to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So, I feel you there. It's, like, I'm similar to you.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, that was it. I was just concluding. I've always been more afraid of unknown.
That's the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
For me, I'm leaning to your side, Matt. And then, like, I guess the balanced opinion, because it is one of those things where I'm just the opposite of, it's gonna come here, I know what to do. Me in my unbridled epicness, I always just feeling, whenever I watch, like, a physically scary monster, I could beat it. There isn't a single physical slasher villain that I don't think I could plan a way around. I'm just going to say that right. And I think both of you selling yourself short, because I think both of you could find it. They're not fucking hard to avoid, a guy with a knife. Come on.
Also, I watched Chucky for the first time, actually, a few months ago. And I was just like, I was sat there the whole time just like,
it's a doll. Kick it.
Yeah, right? Just beat it up.
The thing with me about that movie, this is something that's, maybe this is just a me thing, and I'll float this out there to see if anyone else feels the same way. One thing for me is that in a lot of slasher movies, what really takes away the fear is that they always give you some kind of motivation or some kind of reason that it's happening, right? Like in Friday the 13th, or in a lot of these slasher movies, it happens because the kids go to the place where they're not supposed to go, and they ignore all the warnings, and then they die. Like Cabin in the Woods kind of broke down that trope really well. It's like, you're told, don't do this, don't go there, but they go there anyways, and they die. So I'm just like, yeah, the imagery is scary, but this isn't going to stay with me, because I'm not ever going to be in this situation. With Chucky, I'm like, I know it's not some, like, creepy, haunted doll, it's just the spirit of some serial killer in this doll, and it's weird and kind of stupid. I guess it's kind of scary because like any family could have purchased that doll, but like usually in horror movies, as soon as they give me some sort of motive or some sort of like specific situation, I'm not scared anymore. I'm just kind of like, whatever. But then if it's just like, I don't know. There's this like movie called like 1408 about this like haunted hotel room.
Love that movie.
Yeah, I fucking love that movie. And he goes there and he's like a ghostwriter, and he's just like, he writes about like spirits and stuff. And he's like, all right, I'm gonna stay in this haunted hotel room. He doesn't actually believe it. And he asks the desk clerk, he's like, all right, what's the story? Did someone die there? Did someone commit suicide? And he's just like, it's just an evil room. Like, there is no story. It's just evil. I'm like, yes, that's that. Now we're talking.
Yep. Chucky's such a disappointment because they play up this whole like, oh, Charlie's crazy. They really should have just 100% left it to that. Never told you whether or not Chucky was actually an evil doll.
Oh, for sure, yeah, absolutely.
That would have been such a better movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I generally think less is more when it comes to like truly effective horror. Like obviously, if your whole point is to be like a gore fest, then like whatever, you do you, boo. But if you're trying to actually like stick in people's minds, at least for me, the less I know about what's going on, the better. Now sometimes that doesn't always work. Sometimes you can go too far in that direction to the point where you just have no idea what's happening. But it's a balancing act. And if you over-explain something, it's not scary anymore, to me anyways.
No, absolutely. It's really interesting to just see how those things are again just visually portrayed, because Chucky, I mean, it a lot of it's to do with the script and plotting, but I mean, if you just shot the whole fucking movie where all we see is a tiny hand stabbing people, and Charlie's wearing the same pajamas that Chucky's wearing. Like, if all we ever saw is just the tiny little childlike hand stabbing people, and Charlie keeps saying it's the doll, and we never got any goddamn confirmation that the doll's actually possessed by an evil serial killer, that'd have been a great fucking horror movie, where it's just like left really vague and creepy. As is, it's just camp, right? It was getting to that point where the slasher villain, you could only go so far with it, and then you just quickly ran out of ideas, and so it became a doll. So instead of a big imposing, 8-foot tall guy who you don't have any hope of taking down, Alfie, it's a doll who you can easily kick across the room, but this one will kill you. So it reaches a point, and then it becomes ridiculous, and I think that's just how we learn how to cope with things. It's we made the devil campy. And then we made the devil sympathetic, and we want to fuck him, and Lucifer's a good show.
I mean, like people have been horny on Maine for Satan for fucking centuries.
No, I mean, sure, but like it's conveniently packaged up in the modern era.
Oh, sure.
There's less shame of it. It's now on network television. It's not cults of Satanists anymore.
Oh, that's true. Speak for yourself.
Well, I mean, one of my favorite like current shows, or I guess recent shows, is Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And they go out of their way to depict that like witches and like people in the like magical, because in that universe, witches get their powers from demons, which is kind of like traditionally mythologically true.
Sabrina, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina is everything that Christian parents of Harry Potter fans thought Harry Potter was in the 90s.
For sure. And that show goes out of its way to depict how kind of debaucherous these like Satan worshipping people are. Like, they do have like promiscuous sex at young ages and stuff like that, and it's like and again, it's just this mixing together. Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, fantastic show, by the way. Just so good.
Absolutely. All right, is there anything else anyone really wanted to make sure we covered in this topic of visualization of horror?
I guess maybe you could. Okay, so we talked a lot about movies and video games and stuff. Do you feel like there is? I don't know how many of you this you've read, but with just like scary books, do you think the lack of any visual at all makes it scarier?
Oh
Or do
yes,
you-
absolutely, 100% HP Lovecraft.
Mhm.
That's all he does.
I haven't read enough. I haven't read enough like horror literature to really have a strong opinion on that, unfortunately.
For me, like we did this episode last year of like horror's best medium, and for me it is prose. It is the novel, because of examples like H.P. Lovecraft, where he'll have sentences like, "Words cannot describe the horror I saw there," and that's just like, well, fuck. What do you? You can't do that to me. Now I'm imagining it. It's your job to write it down. Like that. Like it's just infinitely worse than anything you can put on screen. It's just your mind does it to you, and that's the thing that's like really fucky and meta about horror and prose is you do it to yourself. One thing I can't do, I can't read about surgery or anything like really particularly like gruesome. I can watch Saw movies all day, and I can watch a guy just get his arm twisted around 360 degrees, and I'm fine. But like reading about, like I remember in high school I was reading a book, and there was just maybe 2 paragraphs pretty vividly describing a guy going into anaphylactic shock.
Mm-hmm.
And it just, like, I was sweating in the middle of a classroom. I almost threw up. It was really, really bad. Reading horror is always going to be worse for me than seeing it.
I guess the best example I have of that from my own personage is I really like the original Robert E. Howard Conan short stories like a lot. And Robert E. Howard was pen pals, for lack of a better word, with H.P. Lovecraft. So a lot of the way magic is described in Conan is in terms of cosmic horror. And there's a great short story, one of the famous ones called Tower of the Elephant. And Conan climbs to the top of this tower, and inside he finds this creature. And the way they describe the creature is kind of terrifying, and it paints this like mental image in your head. You're just like, that is so like goddamn unnerving. But then it's one of the most famous Conan short stories of all time, Tower of the Elephant. So it's got a bunch of artwork, like official like artists, professional artists who have done their renditions of this creature, and they're never as scary as what you picture in your head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's interesting because I guess maybe another avenue of that, but it's still very much just prose delivered in a different way, is one of my favorite things. Like I'm a big fan of Doctor Who, but Doctor Who has never scared me, even like despite the reputation England has, because again the British are just fucking bitches. The idea of Doctor Who's on, hide behind the sofa. Never had that even since I was a little kid. When like a little kid, I watched Blink, didn't fucking move from my seat. I watched it, I didn't blink once the entire episode.
I'm sure. Physically possible right there.
Yep.
Hey, you don't know me. But there's a thing with Doctor Who that has scared me, and that was the 8th Doctor audio drama, The Chimes at Midnight, and how that plays with how it describes it. It really fucks with your perception of time. It's the first time I've ever experienced what a time loop would feel like, and it fucked me up for like a week. Just the repetition of something over and over and over again at a certain time, but then little details changed, and then that's the story you have to keep track of. But then each detail that's changed get more and more horrifying. Like a person dies, time loop happens, that person dies more graphically. Now 2 people die. Now 3 people die, and all of them are more graphic than the first 2. And it's just like, holy shit! Again, I'm not doing it justice, but that's the kind of storytelling where I don't think you can even attempt to do that visually. I think that all has to come from your head to imagine that level of the same event where it induces that kind of you're feeling, oh, I'm listening to the same thing again, so you've got a deja vu to it, but then little things are changed, so it starts fucking with you.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. It's really interesting the way horror adapts and how it changes as a device of storytelling and what you can and can't do when you change mediums. I think horror might be the most like distinct in different mediums than anything else. Like comedy, you can have witty dialogue novels, witty dialogue plays, witty dialogue movies, and they all work pretty much just as effectively. Drama, romance, all that stuff I think still works. But like horror changes drastically depending on the medium, which is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think that might be getting too far out of the topic. So I think we're at a pretty good place, and we should wrap up at this point, don't you, Alfie?
I mean, you're the boss. I'm just the one who makes the show entertaining.
Well, I'm glad you know your place. Okay. Well, everyone, thanks very much for joining us for this year's rendition of Horror Month. We'll be back next month to get on our moral high horses and talk about history. That's always my favorite month of the year, History Month. So, until then, I'm Scythe Part 2.
I am a ghost for fun.
I'm that Matt Killer.
Nice. And we are your ghouly gentlemen, and we will be dissecting things.
You weren't supposed to help her.